think everyone probably has, every writer has at least one, maybe more than one, of those I'm going to give up now times. And this was one of my I'm going to give up now.
This book is the first one where I really felt part of a community of readers and writers.
I had never had such a immediate and vivid experience of character before. They were almost fully formed. They started arguing in my head, and they argued in my head for like the next 18 months.
And you need something. You need to be stirred to do this crazy thing like write books. You need to be moved. You know, anything in this genre is purpose-built for film because they're so disciplined in the telling. That's what I learned about writing a thriller, is that you can't be digressive in the way you can with a big baggy literary monster, you know. You've got to be so targeted and disciplined, and the story has to, it's filmic. It's in its DNA, it's filmic, because it raises the pulse. And you know, you're reading a book, but you could also be eating popcorn at the same time, you know.
So the prize itself has been running since 2016 and supports and celebrates the best adventure writing of the last year. Celebrates adventure fiction as a genre, and that's from the books on the shortlist to the writers who write them and the readers who read them. In the shortlisting process, and I need to say a quick thank you here, we work with a team of librarians and library staff who look for the novels which both honour the traditions of adventure and those which are unafraid to try something new, whether that's a setting, a style of writing, or a really distinctive character that just grabs us. But the most important thing in any adventure story is a journey so compelling that we have no choice to get on board. And the authors we're talking to this evening did just that. In fact, they took us on the run. So I'm going to hand over to our authors now. And Anthony, I will come to you first. If you could give us a quick introduction to yourself. And I believe you've also got a couple of minutes of Going Zero to treat us to.
Yes, well, hello, everybody. I'm Anthony, author of Going Zero. Who am I? God, that's far too epistemological to start off with. I'm a writer. It's what I've been doing since, I guess, the age of about 24, when I emerged from being a journalist. That had been my first incarnation as a writer, hammering out stories that I had varying degrees of not caring about, and then I thought I want to write things that I'm passionate about, and so I began an apprenticeship, which is, I would say, still ongoing. I like to challenge myself and try new things, and this book is something of a departure for me in terms of being a genre novel. So it's okay. I'll just read a little section here. This scene is set in Fusion Central, but with the technology that's available to should we call them the hunters, they're able to almost transmogrify and be in these other venues, almost a bit like Star Trek, and being, you know, transported to this location as holograms. So the holograms are talking to us, to each other, in a scene which is of interest to them, which is the private home of one of the contestants, called Caitlin Day. So Fusion Central, Washington, D.C. Public librarian Erica begins her digest to Sigh. Biography, been living in this apartment 5 years, it's rent controlled, meets people in person via the library, no social media presence at all. Is that possible still? Asks Sigh. Well, the lady is entirely Google proof. Nothing comes up, a life lived entirely in the actual. Huh. Documented mental health issues? Well, here the plot thickens. Erica's loose blue form moves towards the bookshelves. Big fan of detective fiction and thrillers, as you can see, probably where she got the phone idea from, but currently reading Anna Karenina. How can we tell? Well, she has it on loan, but it's not in her house, so we assume she's carrying it with her. Why would she bring a book? For pleasure, we assume. Let's get an analysis of the book, find out what it might inspire her to do. Throw herself under a train, Sai suggests. What? Anna throws herself under a train in the book at the end. I read it a couple of years ago, remember? Well, what happens before then? Well, she leaves her husband for her lover. So does Caitlin have a lover? Not that we know about. Okay, so back to the mental health issues. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder in her late teens, hospitalized twice, on and off her meds ever since. She turned up barefoot at the airport a year ago, complaining she'd lost her plane ticket and saying that the president was in her apartment. Looks like she is off her pills again now. Last prescription was filled 6 months ago. Supply was for 4 weeks. I think they were supposed to weed out the crazies, Sai asks. Well, by design, the selection team chose a wide variety of types. Maybe they felt we need to be ready for crazy. Our enemies will occasionally be on the crazy side. Sai shrugs. You're right. He surveys the librarian's book-choked shelves. You'd think she'd get enough of books during the day. He sees lots of orange and green covers, bird with age, paperback editions of classic British and American novels, and the sort of wrist-breaking Russian numbers he occasionally name-checks in those what I'm reading listicles, but has never actually read. Spine's all cracked and roughened. Sai, by contrast, busy as he is, time-compromised, listens to his books, strictly non-fiction, in digested versions at 1.5 speed while he's working out. Way more efficient, and he gets the gist. The VR recreation here is perfect. You almost believe you could reach out and pick one up and turn the pages. What else? He asks. Sai walks through the sofa, looking for family photos, anything they can reverse image search for people, places. Nothing. Just more art postcards. The room has been data mined, of course. The book's catalogue, the prints identified, anything to thicken their files on Caitlin, the renegade bookworm.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anthony. What a wonderful line to end on, the renegade bookworm. We had a lot of bookworms who very, very much enjoyed Going Zero. And you've raised some great questions there, which hopefully we can come back to as well from that extract about technology and also about privacy. So more to come on that later in the talk. Emma, we're going to come to you now as well, and I'll ask exactly the same thing. If you could give a quick introduction, and then we'd love to hear a few minutes of No Country for Girls as well.
Great. Thanks, Georgina. Yeah, so I'm Emma Stiles and I write contemporary Australian noir about young women taking on the patriarchy. That is pretty well an enduring theme, although No Country for Girls is my first published novel. I wrote 3.5 unpublished novels before this, which were all young adult novels, in fact. And naturally, we might talk about that if we get a chance. So yes, but this was definitely an adult crime thriller with my 2 teenage protagonists. I'm going to read from the beginning of Charlie's chapter 3. So the book is told from the points of view of Charlie and Nao and Charlie's older sister Gina. I wanted to show you a glimpse of these characters when they first get out on the highway, which this is. So yeah, here is Charlie. The sun wakes me, too hot and too bright. Gotta be a dream, a real shit one, because all I see is highway, flat orange dirt and blue sky. Fuck, it's not a dream. What happened to the city? I sit up and look at Nao, blink again at the windscreen. There's not even paddocks or fences, just spiky grey bushes and dead brown grass, a few crook-looking trees chucking shadows across the dirt. Nao doesn't answer. She's eyes front with the windscreen visor pulled down, this big pair of sunnies on her face. Where'd she get them from? She's driving like an old woman, like there's a violet crumble up her ass. Got her window cracked open, a blast of hot air and bitumen and the sound of tyres rubbing on the highway. She's dead on the speed limit, not a K over. I clock Jean's photo hanging from the rear view and I get a pinch of cold on my neck. Daryl, the pisshead dickhead. I'm still not sorry. Don't feel no different, do I? Don't know if I should or not. Feels like a thing that happened to me, not the other way around. I blink and pull the visor down, stick my hand in the pocket of my shorts to check the gold is still there, that Nao didn't take it while I was out. What time is it, I say? Where are we? Thought you wanted to go to your auntie's place. I do. Northern suburbs, you said. I didn't say anything about suburbs. No way. Better not be someplace in the bush. Who am I kidding? It already is. A highway dead straight and totally flat, one lane each way through empty scrub, one set of white lines on grey bitumen, the same out the back window as the front. There's nothing else between us and the horizon. There's zero. The sky bigger than I've ever seen it and makes my brain hurt. I remember the tall dude in the street outside our place, zigzagging blocks before we lost him. I need to call Jean. Nao side-eyes me. You can't tell her anything. I thought we agreed. She's going to worry, doesn't know where I am. I check my phone under my shirt so Nao can't see it. 6:34 in the morning, 3 missed calls from Jean last night, 1 before and 2 after Daryl happened. Could have woken me. You fell asleep before we crossed the river. So I got tired. Not every day shit like that happens. I stretched my neck and my arms in one piece, no thanks to Daryl, except my throat still hurts like I've been eating gravel. Nao looks in the rear view. It's not exactly how I imagined the week starting either. An accessory to murder on the run in the victim's vehicle. Hardly murder, accident, self-defense, manslaughter, tops.
Oh, you've left us wanting more there. Thank you, Emma. That was a fantastic section to read. And like we said, from Charlie's perspective, but I will say that Nao is just as feisty for anyone who's not read the book yet.
She holds her own, which is challenging, you know. Yeah.
Very true, very true. So you both gave us a short introduction to yourselves, but I'd like to open the questions by taking it back to the very beginning and asking how you both became published authors, and what that kind of journey to publication was for you. Anthony, you got there first, so I'll start with you.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned before, got out of school, really became a journalist to escape school, quite practically. There was an announcement over the intercom, anyone interested in a career in journalism, line up outside the science lab. And me and another spotty kid were the only 2 who showed up. So it was really to escape class. And so I found myself as a cub journalist. And within a year, I was in charge of a whole province of New Zealand, where I was born. It was just farmers and sheep, housewives and sheep. And so for 2 years, I was in charge of this station, but I learned something about writing and that process, which has stood me in good stead really ever since, which was essentially efficiency, compression of storytelling, getting to the point, not bearing the lead, and also demystifying the process. There was no time to sort of consider, am I feeling inspired this morning? So you just have to do it. And so I've been able to be relatively consistently productive in my writing career. So I then went to university and then thought I'd become a poet. And for 2 years, I was on the unemployment benefit as a poet, becoming a bohemian, and until I was dragged in by the unemployment office, and they said, we're done with you being a poet, welching off the system. Can you act? And I said, well, I've never acted before, but suddenly they said, well, we have a position for you as an actor. So I ended up doing reduced Shakespeare in schools. We did 20-minute versions of Hamlet and Macbeth and so forth. And I played all the key roles. At 23, I played King Lear. So I never lacked for ambition. And one day someone came in and said that the theatre has gone dark, a play has collapsed. And if anyone can write a play, we have 3 weeks, we could put on a play in a commercial theatre. So I was the closest thing that we had to a writer. So I wrote a play, and the next 10 years of my life, I was a playwright. Some of those plays then were spotted film potential for films, and I directed 2 films. So I got involved in filmmaking, learned, the tough, challenge of going from being a novelist or a playwright to a screenwriter. And then I started to nurture this idea of being a novelist. And so I ended up working all 3 of those different, mediums. And I've continued to do that to this day. So I still work in theatre, still work in cinema, and still work in fiction and non-fiction.
Do you feel like it was a fairly relatively easy transition for you to become a novelist?
No, excruciating. Not just for me, but for my audiences. First efforts were embarrassing, like most apprentice works. But I had the audacity of ignorance. I didn't know what I was doing, and sometimes that's construed as originality. So I was often touted as being entirely original, and so I got a nice break, I think, as I entered all these professions. But looking back, they were very, quite flawed works. But I stuck with it. I had a sort of stickability when it came to these things.
And Emma, how does that compare with your experience? You said you had 3.5 unpublished novels, and this is your debut.
Yeah, so my experience is pretty different. I was born in the UK, but I grew up in Western Australia. So we moved there when I was 9, and I came back to the UK in my 20s, and I thought I was just coming for 2 years. And I hadn't really, I guess I'd quite enjoyed writing at school, but I never really had any confidence. And then in the late 90s, I started writing, and I remember that really clearly. At the time, I was writing just for myself. I was writing short stories and poems. And I was really writing out of homesickness for Western Australia. That's what started me. And I just kept doing that. And then I remember about 10 years later, I was, because I ended up staying in the UK much longer than I thought I was going to. And that time, in fact, my whole adult life has kind of been defined by this homesickness for Western Australia and kind of being torn between places and people. So there was a time, I remember it very, very clearly, which was 2008, I went to the Writers' Weekend at the Perth Festival, which is the International Arts Festival in Perth every year. I was standing in line for Sean Tan to sign a book for me. And I had this light bulb moment, which was, I need to write a novel. And I don't know why it was, because, I don't know why really it was that moment, but I felt so happy. I remember standing in this queue feeling so happy, because I just thought, this is my thing. This is my thing. Like, I think I'd been having this thing about everyone's got a thing they can do, and I don't know what my thing is. And for whatever reason at that moment, I thought writing was it. So of course, I did not realize how hard it was going to be. So I spent the next 14 years pretty well doing lots of courses. I did courses in writing for children, which was an incredibly helpful grounding. So it's really interesting listening to Anthony talk about, your grounding, Anthony, in writing for the stage and the screen. And writing for children, you have to grab your reader on the first page. So I would write these novels, I would decide they weren't good enough, and I would put them in the bin, and then I would write another one. And that's how I kept writing books that didn't get published. The story of No Country for Girls is a little different, and yeah, we might, I think we will probably come to that, but that gives you a bit of an idea of what got me to the point of starting that book.
Why don't we come to that now?
Okay. Yeah. So I had, like I said, I'd done all these courses. I think everyone probably has, every writer has at least one, maybe more than one, of those I'm going to give up now times. And this was one of my I'm going to give up now. And I remember saying to a writer friend, I said to her, if I wasn't trying to write books, I could have a really nice life. And she just looked at me like, I don't think that's the kind of nice life that you actually want. But anyway, I could tell, she didn't say it, but I could tell that's what she thought. So I didn't give up. I saw this course in crime fiction at the University of East Anglia that you could do part-time and mostly online. And I just knew that was the course for me. The books I had been writing before, they were all young adult, but in each one, the characters would get slightly older and the themes would get darker. So I was well on track for writing a crime novel. It was the obvious next step. And I went on the course with a very clear idea of the book I was going to write, which is not No Country for Girls. It was a totally different book. And in the second week, we did a writing exercise. And these two characters appeared, Charlie and Nao, in this writing exercise, and they blew me away. I had never had such an immediate and vivid experience of character before. They were almost fully formed. They started arguing in my head, and they argued in my head for like the next 18 months, which was great because that was about the time it took to write the first draft. And I knew that they could carry a whole novel. I didn't know what the novel would be at that point, but that was the kicking off point for writing it. And I had chosen that course because we would have to hand in a whole book at the end of the course, and I wanted the discipline of having to write a whole book and hand it in.
Fantastic. I'm going to take us back a moment just to talk about the theme of this evening, which is adventure. And specifically for the Wilbur Smith Adventure Writing Prize, we have a broad but specific criteria of what adventure is. And that is a journey, themes of courage, endurance and resourcefulness, and a connection with different cultures or realities. And we feel that that's present in all 6 of the books that have made the shortlist for this and any year's prize. So Anthony, I'll start with you and ask what you think it is that defines Going Zero as an adventure. And did you consider it an adventure yourself before we got in touch?
No, well, that's very astute. No, I approached the story as I would any of the other, should we say, literary fiction. Sounds a bit grandiose, but essentially, I think all my previous novels have fallen into that bracket. Meaning they were not non-genre type concepts. This was just another novel for me. But I'm now persuaded that it had the kind of propulsiveness and the ticking clock aspect that it was excitedly grasped as a thriller. And what I was very excited to experience was that I had now entered into a community of writers and readers that I'd never been in contact with before. And I now look back at my previous 30 years of writing with some sense of lost opportunity, because the literary fiction area is a tough one. It's it's very hard to find readers. Book sales, except for the odd breakout one, there's no inbuilt readership for them. But this book is the first one where I really felt part of a community of readers and writers. So it's really not by design, but rather by just the not by accident, but by the choice of subject matter that finds me participating in this group chat now.
And can you tell us a little bit more about that subject matter, the inspiration in particular? Because I know you've said previously that it really was a question of privacy and what that means that sparked the idea of going zero.
Yeah, I guess it was probably 2016 is probably the date where we had a dinner party and there was a group of friends came over, probably on our second bottle of wine, and we were talking about the weird instances we probably all had, where you receive a targeted ad minutes after you've just spoken about a certain subject. Like, for example, someone says, oh, I'd love to go to Tenerife this summer. And then, you know, suddenly your phone has an ad for Tenerife. And we became aware of the spooky reality that our devices are working against us. They're actually spying on us. In 2016, this seemed entirely paranoid. Now we take it as read because that's how fast technology annexes sacred areas of life, like privacy, to the point where I think now privacy has been lost. We live in a post-privacy world. And I think young people, I have 3 sons, they care much less about privacy than I do. They would rather be known, and they would rather everything about them be known. They're more scared of secrets. So that's sort of how it started. And it took me into a world of research. And I tried to write a novel that I thought would be 5 years in the future. But in the 3 years it took me to write the book, by the time the book came out, I may only be about 5 minutes in the future. That's how fast technology is evolving, and how we are kind of sleepwalking into the replacement of independent thought and judgment with these automated systems of control and manipulation that technology is sort of doing, you know, and we're doing very little about it because we're so in awe of technology and the little miracles that happen in the palm of our hand.
I'm just going to skip forward to something we were going to talk about later, but it ties in really well here. And that, Anthony, is the question of how much of that fusion technology in Going Zero is already real. So for those of you who haven't read the book yet, there are things like devices listening, but there's also things like gait identification, how people can be tracked through cameras by how they walk. So how did you do that research, and how much of it do you think exists?
Well, it was very cutting edge, and it was sometimes speculative technology that you had to be a futurist to start imagining, you know, like a George Orwell. But as I wrote and as I updated the state of technology, all the predictions proved correct, whereby that we can be recognized by not just our eyes, you know, with iris recognition, but gait. And now that they've in certain areas in China, they're testing technology which can monitor your mood through your expression. So it's becoming, algorithms are mapping the human face for expression being decoded. We're being deciphered by machines, and machines are learning from us at a frightening rate, and replacing you know, sacred areas of human activity. So I'm actually on strike right now because I'm a member of the Writers Guild of America, and we are the first industry in the world to do industry-wide strike in opposing AI technology. And I'm very proud of us for doing that, because I think, you know, a stand needs to be taken.
Thank you. No, that's really interesting. And Emma, I think it's interesting in relation to No Country for Girls as well, because you know, in both books, the protagonists are on the run, they're being chased. And there is a moment in No Country for Girls where they realize how they are being traced. And for them, it's relatively easy to figure out what they should do about it. Do you think No Country for Girls is kind of up to date in terms of technology and the lives that they're living?
I think it may not be, but I think I tried quite hard not to date it in any way. So I knew that they would both have phones, but they would need to get rid of their phones quite early on. So that is a little cause of conflict between them, because Charlie has her mum's playlist on her phone and she doesn't want to be parted from her phone. Charlie's mum has died some years before the book starts, and we do find that out quite early on in the novel. So yes, Charlie does not want to be parted from her phone. So I think all I really thought about was, I need them to not be trackable. I think that was the main my main aim, really, was how can I so in a way it was quite simple, because also, you know, they were driving through remote areas where there are not CCTV cameras or, you know, any of those things. There isn't even a particularly good mobile signal in a lot of those places. But anyway, like I said, they had got rid of their phones at that point. But yeah, if you're in the kind of areas that they drive through on this road trip, you really need a satellite phone if you're going to be able to reliably communicate. So it wasn't really an issue for me. And I didn't want technology to date the novel. So there is some mention of social media at certain points, but I think which in a way probably would date the novel, you know, because things will move on and already have. But I did choose to minimize that, definitely, which I think in the environment they were in was fine.
Absolutely. And I think that's all part of their adventure, that loss of contact that they both experience.
Yes.
So taking it back as well to ask you for No Country for Girls, what do you think it is that defines your novel as an adventure story?
Well, a bit like Anthony, I didn't necessarily think of it that way. I just wrote the book that I wrote the book that I most wanted to read. That was the book I wrote, and I was very much led by the characters. But then, having been shortlisted and started to look at, well, what is it that makes this an adventure? It is definitely the journey aspect for me, but there are different aspects of that journey. So of course there is the physical journey. They are, for most of that road trip, they are on Great Northern Highway, which I more recently read is one of the most remote sealed roads in the world. It is the highway that runs from Perth in Western Australia up into the Kimberley. So yes, there is this incredible physical journey, and there are hazards on this journey. They're driving through an unforgiving landscape. They're being pursued. That all has these elements of adventure in it. But also, they were each of Charlie and Noah, and Gina too, although it really is Charlie and Noah's story, they are both running from something, but they want very different things. These are two young women who don't know each other at the start of the book. They don't like each other. They certainly don't trust each other. And they want very different things. So they're running. My challenge was to try to keep them together when they want very different things. And actually, they would quite like to dump each other whenever they get the chance. So they're running towards different things. The landscape means different things to each of them. So they each go through a very different emotional journey in relation to the physical journey. So that was another aspect of journey. And I think the one that took me by surprise, but in a way ended up for me as a writer being quite a driving force, was the journey of what happens between the two of them. So, you know, I was finishing the first draft during 2020 when all of these terrible things were happening in the world, and it felt like those, inequality between people was really brought out so much during particularly that year, 2020. And so I think that for me, writing two characters trying to connect across their difference, because they are very different in many ways, became really a driving force. So that was kind of almost the most magical thing in the end about the journey and the adventure for me.
Could I ask a question? For Emma, to what extent was Thelma and Louise, the great movie by Ridley Scott, was that at all an inspiration? Has similar, obviously, some similarities in that a crime unites two disparate women and they head off on a road trip.
Thelma and Louise was a huge influence. When I met the two characters in this writing exercise, I had already been kicking around the idea of writing a Thelma and Louise style story, because that movie had such a huge effect on me when I'd seen it. While I was still living in Australia, I had seen that movie. And so I think I'd carried around the possibility of writing something like that for a long time. And when I met Charlie and Nao, I knew they were the perfect characters for the story, because I felt they needed a big story that unfolded over enough time and distance, because they had a lot of stuff to work out. There are many differences. Charlie and Nao are absolutely not Thelma and Louise. They, like I said, they're not friends at the beginning of the book, but absolutely the kind of tone of Thelma and Louise was and how cinematic. Obviously it's a movie, but I had also read the script quite a few times, so yeah, that cinematic influence was a big one for sure.
Constantly exploding the expectations of what these women are capable of and what they're, breaking out of the boundaries of their normal behavior.
Yeah, totally. And, I mean, the shocking thing was that it was almost like it was almost like 30 years have gone by and how much has changed. It didn't feel like my characters had to be, they were kind of experiencing and challenging some of the same kind of stuff. Totally. So but just at a different stage in their lives and very different characters. So yeah, thanks, great question.
I think it's interesting that both of you have female leads. Particularly sometimes adventure can be perceived as quite a male dominated genre, and was this an active decision on both of your parts, and is it vital / how important is it to the story? Anthony, we'll come to you first.
In my case, the choice of a female librarian who was totally analog, who was not LinkedIn, no social media presence, Google proof, create a character that the powers that be would underestimate. It was necessary for the sort of the narrative that I wanted the person that they thought would be the easiest to catch would prove to be the hardest to catch. And so inbuilt in that was a kind of male view, if you like, that, okay, we have a cliched idea of what the limits of what this particular character will be able to do and predict and just their level of smarts and street wisdom. And I wanted the characters to subvert that so that they realized that this is not at all what they expected of this person. So yeah, it was very, very necessary in the development that for me that should be a woman, because in a male-dominated society, women won't be any surprise to a lot of people on this Zoom, are often underestimated.
Emma, same question for you.
Yes, well, as I have said, I think I pretty well always write about young women who are not powerful in their lives and who are finding ways to step into their power in different ways and to find freedom in this patriarchal society. whatever form that might take. So I think it wasn't ever a question, and with the big Thelma Louise influence, it wasn't ever a question that they wouldn't be two young women. But I mean, also, I was really led by the characters. These were the characters that appeared, and then that they definitely came first. Although I'd had the idea of this possible road trip story, they were the thing that happened first. The moment those characters appeared, then I knew I needed to find a vehicle for them. So it was, yeah, they were always going to be that. But they are absolutely unapologetically themselves individuals. So they may not behave perhaps in ways that people expect them to, which was also part of the fun of writing them.
We all love a good twist, that's for sure. I'm just going to hop over to a question that's been put in the chat. If anyone does have any more questions for Emma and Anthony, now is the time to pop them in there. So this is a question for both of you. To what extent is writing a cathartic experience for our authors? So Emma, I'll come to you first this time.
I think it depends what's going on for me, but I think it can be hugely. So actually that's really interesting, because when I think back to when I started the book and when the two characters appeared, I do remember I was feeling very angry at the time, and this was the September 2018. So I actually looked back at what was happening in the world. I was angry at the state of the world. I was angry at things that were going on in the world, and we had Trump in power, we had the Brett Kavanaugh sexual assault case, and I just remember feeling really angry that people got away with things and it didn't seem okay. So that was a bit of that was, so in that way, certainly writing Charlie's character, she is a pretty angry, hostile little person at times, and I did find that cathartic. And actually I'm finding it now with the characters I'm writing now in a very different book, but still it's not all about that. Like, in a way, the character then takes me somewhere else, I suppose. Yeah, and I will say, you know, Charlie, she is more than just an angry, hostile little person. She does have quite a lot going on, and she's quite vulnerable as well in her way. She just doesn't like showing that. But yes, I do find I find the whole writing process very interesting from a psychological point of view, and mostly really enjoyable. It has its moments.
No, absolutely. Anthony, would you agree? Do you find the experience at all cathartic?
I'm not sure cathartic is the word. It's agonizing, and it's a relief when you feel you've pulled it off. You know, you've got something that's worth someone else reading. But I guess the way I would answer that is to say that I don't often know what I think or feel about a certain subject until I write about it. And it's in the process of writing it that ideas occur to you, which had you not been tasked with approaching this subject, you would never have conceived of. So you're constantly going into yourself and looking for resources that you hope are there, but you're not sure that they're there. And you're investing ideas and characters with feelings and thoughts and ideas that sometimes surprise you as being much smarter than you are. And, you know, there's an old truism that you can't write a character who's smarter than you are. How could you? It's illogical. If you're able to write about a smart character, then you must be smart, you know. But it's actually the experience of writing it is that you can write a line that's got way more emotional or intellectual IQ than you possess. I mean, I've written screenplays where I've written dialogue for Winston Churchill and Stephen Hawking. And I don't think there would be any debate about who's the smarter. But I was able to dream myself into their lives and inhabit their kind of their style, their command of rhetoric, or the way that they were thinking, and you kind of piggyback them, and suddenly you can amaze yourself. Cathartic. I think it's more revelatory at its best. It's revelatory.
Do you have a preference as a writer, screenwriter, novelist, playwright? Is there one that you enjoy more?
Which one? Was some happen quicker than others, so that you kind of you might think that you're hardwired to prefer writing a poem to a novel, just by the amount of sweat that you have to expend. But I find them all different rewards, and they're all kind of antidotes to each other. So the isolation of writing a novel, I love to then go and work in the theatre with a group of actors and things, and similarly with a movie. So you can have a public life and then a private life as well.
Different perks to each job. I can see a question that we've had in to ask Anthony whether you would consider Going Zero as a film, and also a lovely comment that is that they can imagine No Country for Girls being an incredible film too, and they are both very cinematic.
Yeah, I think Emma, yours is already going to be a film, I think.
It has been optioned. It has been optioned. That's where it's at.
That's where it starts. That's
a very slow process. I would love to see it on the big screen. So who knows? See, I have had a lot of readers tell me how cinematic it is. So
yeah. I have my own film production company, so I'll do yours, Emma, when it goes out of option.
Right. Okay.
It's a very fruitful meeting.
You are already writing the screenplay for Going Zero, Anthony, or
I have. Yes, I already have. Yeah.
It sounds like it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, I think anything in this genre is purpose-built for film, because they're so disciplined in the telling. That's what I learned about writing a thriller, is that you can't be digressive in the way you can with a big baggy literary monster. You've got to be so targeted and disciplined, and the story has to. It's filmic. It's in its DNA. It's filmic, because it raises the pulse, and you're reading a book, but you could also be eating popcorn at the same time.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what an adventure is there to do. Keep you turning those pages, or focus on the screen maybe one day. I'm just going to hop to another question that we've had in the chat. And this is about locations. Do you find it easier to write about a location when you're physically there or have been there, or do you need to have some distance from them? Emma, I'll come to you first on that one.
So so that's a great question. I think for me, honestly, I do need a little bit of distance. So I do need to have been somewhere. I need to have been somewhere, and it doesn't actually matter if those memories are from some time ago, but so I think the distance gives me some kind of longing for the place, I suppose. And then I find that, it's easier for me, I think, to conjure a place. And I spend a lot of time in Western Australia because my family are there, and I do research places, but I have learned that it is easier for me to write about them when I'm not actually physically there, which I didn't expect. I kept thinking, why isn't this happening? The last couple of summers I've spent staying with my mum in Perth, and it's not actually been that easy to write about the place when I'm there.
Anthony, how about you?
Yeah, I think to persuade a reader in the believability of a place, it has to be furnished with appropriate detail, and however you get that detail, whether you go personally or do a lot of research, that's the key. So if I was doing Elizabethan in England, I can't visit that place. It doesn't exist anymore. But through research, you can furnish your scenes, with sufficient detail so that they're alive. And that's the task, is however you do it, you've got to bring them alive with detail.
Absolutely. Emma, I know you had one question for Anthony that was particularly fun, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to ask it. So I'll hand over to you.
Okay. Yeah, it was, I found one of the things I found so interesting in Going Zero was that the kind of two things going on at the same time. And one was about privacy and about how us on the inside, it feels like where can we find freedom in ourselves, but also this sense of, is there any wilderness left? Is there anywhere physically we can go where people can't find us? And so I just was really interested in the contrast between those two things. And my question was, do you think of human beings as nature too, as part of nature, or something separate or different to nature?
Yeah, I think, I was very preoccupied with that there's the inner privacy. Does anyone have access to our thoughts, our behavior? We think that they're absolutely sealed off from the world, but are they? Or are we so predictable that people can predict what we will think or do? And I think we are entering into that space where our thoughts may no longer be our own. And we may not have complete, ungoverned, singular control over our own thoughts and behavior. Sounds speculative, sounds paranoid, but the technology has already been developed to do that. And I'm old enough to remember a time when, you could go into the wild. I was born on the side of a dormant volcano in New Zealand called Mount Taranaki. And I used to go every weekend with a friend. My parents would not know where the hell I was between a Friday and a Monday. And we relished that, being off the grid. And no amount of technology could have predicted, what we were going to do or say or think, And so there's a kind of curmudgeon in me that wants to preserve these things, these traditions, which we took for granted, but which I can just feel it, is that we're losing control of, and our sort of mad dash with our love affair with technology. And so it found its way into this book, some of those passions. And you spoke very, very powerfully, Emma, about passion driving that story. You were angry. You had seen things in society. And you didn't directly write a book about Trump or Kavanaugh, but it fueled a sort of passion and vision. And you need something. You need to be stirred to do this crazy thing like write books. You need to be moved, and somehow those passions find their way into the story, even when it may be no direct correlation.
Yeah, I think that's true. It does. We need to be driven, right, to sustain the writing of a whole novel. And I absolutely did that. Your passion and definitely comes through in the themes in the book, these two really strong personalities facing off against each other, who look at the world in very different ways in terms of Caitlin and Cy.
I'm just going to say that we are coming to an end. We've had one fantastic question in, which I'd just like to quickly end on. And this is about accountability, which is a strong theme in Going Zero. I actually think it's also an interesting question in No Country for Girls, about whether the line is blurred between right and wrong, whether the right people have comeuppance for their actions. So this is really to both of you. Could you talk about the endings and how did you decide who was held accountable? Anthony, I'll come to you first on that one.
My ending was not nailed down until about the 5th draft. I kept changing it because I didn't want it to be leave the reader in too comfortable a place, because I thought that would be dishonest. And yet I wanted it to be satisfying. And so I was just wrestling with the idea of how can it be satisfying, i.e. a happy ending, without it being a happy ending. And I settled on, I obviously can't discuss what happens, for spoiler reasons, but I settled on something which I think was honest to the subject that I was dealing with, and satisfying, but not a traditionally happy ending.
I think you absolutely nailed that.
Yes.
Emma, yours?
Yeah, I didn't know exactly how it would end, but I knew how it would feel at the end for the characters, and I knew how it would feel for me as the writer, and hopefully as the reader as well. So that was my guide. I mean, we did change the ending somewhat. I guess the challenge I set myself was, and I don't think this is spoilery, because this is really only one possible ending of many, but I guess I set myself the challenge of, could I write a Thelma and Louise style story where my two protagonists don't have to drive off a cliff at the end? So that was kind of my challenge for myself. And my editor had some somewhat different ideas for the ending than me, so it changed a bit. It didn't change hugely, and it certainly didn't change in terms of tone, and it didn't change in terms of who gets their comeuppance, as you call it. I think that is satisfying, but also a bit like Anthony, I didn't want to pull my punches. I wanted it to be, I wanted there to be some gritty reality in, even when you get to the end of that story as well. And so I was trying to find that balance too. I'm very happy with the ending, actually. Yeah.
I think you've both written beautifully bittersweet endings. And for everyone here who's listening tonight, if you've only read one of these books, please go away and read the other one too. And if you haven't read either, then we recommend you going away and getting both of them. So we've run out of time. So I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us, and especially a huge thank you to Anthony and to Emma for taking the time out of their evenings to come and talk to us. If anyone here would like to revisit this talk, we'll be making the recording of the event available on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. And we also, of course, invite you to dive deeper into the other shortlisted novels and their talented authors. I believe my wonderful colleague Charlotte is about to pop a link in the chat box to our website, where you can find out more about the other novels on the shortlist. There's also some Q&As with Anthony and Emma, so maybe more of your questions will be answered there. And then also you should find coming soon links to buy copies of both No Country for Girls and Going Zero. I will say also that we are hosting further talks with the other shortlisted authors, and the next is in a couple of weeks' time, this time at 1 p.m. On Tuesday the 18th of July, which is with Natasha Pulley and Priscilla Morris. There should also be a link arriving in the chat box just now to that one. And finally, one last link. Once you've had a chance to read both of these unputdownable novels, we do encourage you all to cast your vote in the reader's vote element of the prize, and make sure that your voice is heard as part of the judging panel. We give everyone 3 votes, so you don't necessarily have to decide between Anthony and Emma. Both of you, Emma, Anthony, is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off for tonight?
I'm voting for Emma.
Thank you, Anthony.
And thank you, Georgina, and thank you all who've come. Thank you for your interest in this wonderfully old-fashioned thing called a book.
Yes.
Where would we be without them?
Yeah.
Totally.
No.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Anthony and Georgina, and everyone for coming along. I have realised, as you know, this is my first published novel, but I have realised that talking about this book is definitely one of the thing that makes me happiest in the world. So any opportunity is a good one.
Well, hopefully there will be plenty more. And we've got the next couple of months where we'll be talking about your books a lot more ahead of a winner being announced in October. So thank you once again, everyone, for being part of this event. Thank you for tuning in. And all that leaves me to do is to wish you all a lovely evening, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Bye now.
Thank you.